In our first tale of dark temptation,
He just seemed like a normal, nice guy. But underneath, there's this dark and dangerous event.
a mild-mannered gent with a bizarre secret.
The idea that someone would want this is almost inconceivable.
It will confound the police
This made my head spin.
and culminate in murder.
He was a butcher, plain and simple.
And later, a mother of 5 is missing,
It's just like she vanished off the face of the earth.
swept into a vortex of evil
The police detective said, we have some kind of nut on our hands.
that will lead to the gates of hell.
Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub. He was always talking to the devil.
Something very evil was going on.
These chains that bind, these chains that bind your heart to mine.
Even the dawn of a beautiful new day can bring darkness. Early one spring morning in 1998, police officers enter a San Diego hotel room.
When the police walked into the room, the deceased had a look of terror on his face.
It was a grimace of horror. His lips drawn back, his teeth bared, and the covers were all messed up, like he'd been thrashing about.
This was a torturous death.
He did not die peacefully. He did not die quietly.
And cops soon figure out why.
First responding officers discovered that the man had a leg amputation. It was sliced evenly like a loaf of bread.
Is it the work of a sadistic killer? Investigators soon realize this is one crime you won't find in any handbook.
When we saw what this case was about, never again would I say I had seen it all. We were mortified, we were mystified. It's the most bizarre case I've ever worked on.
The dead man is 79-year-old New Yorker Philip Bondi. What was he doing in this hotel room in San Diego? And where is his leg? San Diego detectives turned to the man who called 911.
The call to the police came in from Mr. Bondi's friend, Greg Firth.
Greg Firth also lived in New York. He was a psychologist who was quite a bit younger.
The doctor claims his friend's missing leg is the result of a terrible accident.
Look, we were down in Mexico and Philip got hit by a car.
The friend told the police officers that he had been in a pedestrian traffic accident in Tijuana, Mexico.
No choice, we had to get the leg amputated.
He had had surgery, and then he'd come back to the Holiday Inn to recoup, to recover.
For seasoned investigator Tom Basinski, that story just doesn't wash.
When you get hit by a car badly enough so that you have to have a leg amputated, you're going to have other collateral damage. You're going to have abrasions, and there's going to be other bodily damage. In here, there was nothing of the sort. He just had a leg amputated.
A quick call to Mexican authorities confirms their suspicions.
There was no report of Philip Bondi being in an accident.
For a U.S. citizen to lose a leg in a car accident in Tijuana, somebody would know about it.
Police know Greg Firth is lying.
Something about Mr. Firth It sort of rose those little spider feelers in the back of their brains. They didn't know what was off, but something seemed off.
I've really got to run. I'm due for a conference back in New York.
Because he was very anxious to get back to New York. Like, okay, my friend's dead and I've told you, I'm out of here.
Cops can't hold Firth on a hunch, so they allow him to return to New York.
Initial investigators from National City Police Department were really puzzled. They didn't know what they had.
The only way to know is to probe deeper into Philip Bondi's life.
Bondi was an engineer for a well-known company and was quite successful. He was a single man.
He appeared as the perpetual bachelor who had a close circle of friends.
Detectives discover his closest friend is Greg Firth.
Now, Greg Firth was a sophisticated, intelligent, educated man.
He taught at Ohio State, and he counseled children.
The two men have forged a strong bond over the last 20 years.
He and Greg shared such closeness. Greg understood him like no one else could.
Was Dr. Firth somehow responsible for his best friend's painful death? When the autopsy is carried out, it only muddies the waters. Philip Bondi didn't die from blood loss, but something far more unusual.
The cause of death was called gaseous gangrene.
A lot of guys who had their legs amputated in the Civil War died of gaseous gangrene because surgical techniques were so filthy and surgeons didn't know what they know now. It was extremely rare for someone to have died of gaseous gangrene in a first world country at the time that Mr. Bondi passed away.
It starts out with a body infection, and it increasingly gets so infected that it causes a toxin and kills the person. To die of gangrene means a very slow, potentially very painful process.
That can only mean one thing. Philip Bondi was alive for days after his leg was cut off, suffering incredible pain as the gangrene set in. So how and why was his leg removed?
The investigating officers could find no reason why a leg would be cut off, especially with the bogus story of the pedestrian accident. They didn't believe that, and so they had no idea what was going on.
All they have to go on is a strange clue from the hotel room.
They found 2 receipts in the room. And one of the receipts was for hospitalization for $5,000, and the other receipt was for surgery for $5,000. These were not hospital receipts. These were receipts from a generic receipt book that you could buy at any office supply store.
San Diego detectives head east to New York to find answers, hoping for clues in the victim's home.
So the DA's office sent a team of investigators back to New York and got a consent search of Bondi's apartment.
They're about to pry the lid off a dark temptation that will shock even the toughest law enforcers.
The roof came off the case. The officers were astounded. They called us up and said, "You're not going to believe what we found."
It can't possibly be real.
In the affluent 90s, the Big Apple is full of temptation. But retired engineer Philip Bondi seemed to prefer a more sedate life.
Kind of like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg looks innocuous, but underneath there's this dark and dangerous event.
So how did he end up dead, with one leg removed, in a hotel room in San Diego? Police scour Philip's New York apartment to find out.
During the course of their search, the officers found literature regarding an obsession.
They found numerous photos and slide carousels of amputees, some of them in very provocative positions.
Photos and videos of male amputees, often naked. Cops are bewildered. It seems Philip Bondi had a sordid secret.
The lead detective from National City called and he said, "I'm looking at an article about a fetish called Apotemnophilia." I said, "Apotemno what?"
A big name for a bizarre problem.
Philip Bondi's desire in life was to have his leg removed.
The idea that someone would want this is almost inconceivable.
Police can't believe it, so they put the heat on Bondi's friend, Dr. Greg Firth. Is the psychologist using this warped tale as a cover for murder?
This is some kind of sick, twisted thing that you're doing for kicks. It can't possibly be real.
This was mind-boggling to us. At the time, I had 28 years on as a police officer. I'd been around the block, and this made my head spin.
Philip Bondi loved looking at pictures of amputees because he wanted to be one.
When they see an amputee or see a picture of an amputee, they realize that that's the way I should have been born.
It's not sexual. It is psychological.
The obsession is a condition where an individual starting from childhood feels like their body isn't right and that they should be an amputee.
Psychiatric researcher Dr. Michael First is an expert on this rare obsession. He says sufferers are simply desperate to lose a leg.
They don't think there's anything wrong with the limb. It's not painful, it's not ugly, it's not deformed. They think it's just not right that it's there.
And it could be caused by faulty wiring in the brain.
There's a part of the brain where your entire body is mapped. One of the theories is maybe what's going on is that that part of the brain where your map is on your leg isn't developed properly. So your experience is that it's not my leg because it doesn't fit into the map.
To trick his mind's eye, Philip Bondi dresses up.
He would bind a leg up and tie it off and then wear an overcoat and use crutches so it would appear to someone that they were missing a limb. And that made them feel very good.
It's real.
For Philip, pretending is not enough. He knows there's only one way to truly satisfy his dark temptation.
It's something that rules their entire life. It doesn't go away, and for Philip Bondi, it got worse and worse to the point where the only way he could really continue to feel comfortable was becoming the person he wanted to be, which is to be a leg amputee. If I could only be that way, I will finally have inner peace. That's what the experience is like.
But there's a hitch. No ethical doctor will touch him.
It turns out that surgery of any kind, when you actually do an amputation surgically, is technically maiming someone, which is actually physically altering their body. Where somebody appears to be cutting off a healthy limb, that puts the surgeon at risk of being charged with a crime.
A doctor won't help him. But perhaps a psychologist will. Was Dr. Greg Firth helping his friend overcome his obsession? Dr. Firth tells cops he wasn't treating Philip's affliction. He has it too.
Greg Firth has wanted all of his life to have his own leg amputated.
Bondi and Firth shared their obsession with Apotemnophilia for probably about 20 years.
The respected psychologist can't control his own psychological urges. He's going to excruciating lengths to try to lose his leg.
They would push pins in their legs or small nails. And rub all kinds of yucky bodily fluids in it and try to get it infected. And basically try to hold out till they practically passed out and had to go to the emergency room. They'd be given antibiotics and cleaned up and sent home. So it had never worked.
Greg's not the first sufferer to take drastic action to damage their leg.
There have been people who have been desperate enough to freeze one's leg in dry ice to force a surgeon to actually cut off the limb. There's a famous case of a person who actually used a shotgun to make it look like a hunting accident, but he did it himself.
They'd try tourniquets. They'd try to tourniquet the leg to cut off the blood flow to the point where the lower part of the limb would be dead. They even thought about laying on train tracks, but decided that your odds of somebody finding you or just being killed upon the accident was too great.
Every agonizing attempt Greg Firth makes fails.
No legitimate doctor was going to cut off his healthy leg. They just weren't going to.
Greg and Philip need to find another way to fulfill their dark desire. Browsing through the newspaper one day, Greg Firth finds the answer.
Lo and behold, they happen to see a guy named John Ronald Brown.
Dr. Brown isn't your standard surgeon.
They figured out that he was a sex change doctor.
Brown performs illegal sex change operations, so he might also be willing to amputate a healthy leg.
He was already catering to people who were desperate.
They had made contact with Brown. He was willing to do the surgery.
Phil and Greg's dream has finally come true, but it will soon become their worst nightmare.
Most of the operations he did were horrible.
He was a butcher, plain and simple.
San Diego police are raiding the premises of Dr. John Brown. He's been linked to the mysterious death of New York engineer Philip Bondi.
Boy, what they found was just amazing.
The surgeon has left a horrifying trail of medical malpractice.
They found hundreds of uncapped syringes.
There were bloody towels on the floor. There were surgical instruments on the floor.
Disgusting. It was beyond third world.
Hygienically, it was a disaster.
Foul hygiene is not the doctor's only problem.
Brown did not have a medical license. He had been a doctor, but his medical license was taken away from him.
It hasn't stopped him. Dr. Brown crosses the border to Mexico to perform illegal sex change operations, setting up makeshift surgeries in Tijuana. And in the spring of 1998, John Brown accepts two new patients, Greg Firth and Philip Bondi. They don't want a sex change. They want an illegal amputation.
Mr. Bondi was so desperate to have finally found someone who would perform this operation he'd wanted for virtually his entire life that there was nothing that would have stopped him.
Money is certainly no object. Greg Firth meets up with Dr. Brown in San Diego and hands over $10,000 to carry out the amputation.
Here's Dr. Firth at the clinic, and he's got himself geared up to do this. And at that point, he had not even had any kind of thought of, what am I going to do once he cuts my leg off? It wasn't until later that Brown even thought to go get a pair of crutches.
Firth agrees to have the operation that afternoon.
Greg Firth was all set to have his amputation. He paid John Brown a fair amount of money, went down to Tijuana, and was ready to get his leg cut off.
But when the medical man sees Brown's so-called surgery, Dr. Firth gets cold feet.
He said, I'm looking around at this guy with his shaky hands in this dirty clinic, and I'm thinking, I'm not gonna get out of here alive.
I'm sorry, I can't do this.
And he said he just pulled the plug and said, that's it. I'm not going to do it. I'm done.
Before he leaves Mexico, Greg breaks the bad news to his friend.
Greg Firth called Philip Bondi in New York and told him that he changed his mind.
I couldn't do it. What? Just couldn't do it.
Bondi was very upset about that.
It's what we've always dreamed of.
He described Phil as just almost apoplectic, beside himself. How could you do this? How could you? This is what we've lived for.
Well, if you're not going to take the opportunity, I will.
And Phil demanded to go in his place.
The elderly man has no second thoughts. Philip Bondi hightails it to Tijuana.
He's lived almost 75 years of his life wanting to be an amputee.
There was nothing standing in his way. He didn't care if they did it on a kitchen table. He didn't care about anything except getting his leg cut off.
Dr. Brown isn't fazed by his patient's delicate condition.
Bondi was a thin, frail, 79-year-old man. And Brown did no blood tests, no EKG.
No surgeon would have operated on him in any condition, but that didn't matter at all to Brown. Not at all. He thought he was a superb surgeon.
The good doctor's methods are a little unorthodox.
This old-looking saw. It didn't look like a medical saw. It just looked like a saw, like you'd cut a tree limb off with. Brown had sawed the leg right off, straight through the skin.
To make matters worse, Philip Bondi experiences every patient's greatest fear.
The anesthesia was not sufficient to completely knock him out, and he had some conscious awareness of the amputation as it was going on.
Dr. Brown has botched the amputation. He hasn't left enough skin to close the wound.
When this leg was cut off, it was sliced evenly like a loaf of bread. The skin had to be pulled and stretched. When he stitched it up, that cut off the blood supply that caused the gangrene.
The job's done, and now Dr. Brown must dispose of one vital piece of evidence.
Normally, the leg is tagged and goes through pathology, but obviously he was trying to hide the fact that this was done.
We always wondered what happened to the leg. What did he do with it?
On the way back out in the desert in Mexico, he just threw the leg out the window because the coyotes would eat it.
He discards his patient in much the same way.
He took him to the hotel room in National City at the Holiday Inn and checked him in and left him there. He basically left him there to die.
Over the next 2 days, Philip Bondi goes downhill fast.
He was having some difficulty getting out of bed and using his crutches, and called the security at the hotel to get some help.
Sir? Sir?
And the security guard saw that he was clearly not doing well, was bleeding, and suggested that he go take him to a hospital so this could be treated. Philip Bondi refused.
Sir,
It would have raised questions. If he had gone up to an emergency room, he would have had to explain how this amputation happened, and I guess he would have had to say it was in Mexico, and the whole thing would have immediately fallen apart because it would have been obvious that this wasn't done properly.
Phil Bondi could have called 911, but he never did.
Instead, he suffers in silence.
If you think of death as being something peaceful, this was not.
From the horrible look on his face, they knew there was a lot of suffering involved.
Bondi dies in the early hours of May 11th, 1998.
John Brown was an arrogant butcher. He knew when he picked up that saw to cut off Bondi's leg that he was likely to cause him great bodily injury or kill him.
Investigators discover John Brown has also bungled several sex change operations. Philip Bondi was the climax of his prolific career.
We found lots of videotapes of him performing the actual surgeries. So we knew that he was a bad surgeon. There are many times where you're watching the video and his hands shaking like this as he's trying to talk and explain things. It was horrifying. On many levels, he was a sociopath. I believe that he, like Joseph Mengele, used humans for experimentation to perfect his craft.
John Brown is charged with second-degree murder and 7 counts of practicing medicine without a license.
The only way to stop this guy was to put him in prison for a long time.
The jury agrees. In October 1999, Dr. John Brown is found guilty of murder.
And he was ultimately sentenced to 15 to life plus 21 years.
Dr. Greg Firth avoids a charge of accessory to murder by agreeing to explain their bizarre secret to the jury.
Greg was simply, I'm sure from his perspective, doing something to help his friend or for a fellow sufferer of the condition.
For 75 years, Philip Bondi was a slave to his dark temptation. Did he reach euphoria in those final, agonizing hours?
Someone with an obsession that would go to the lengths that he had over the number of years wouldn't even think about dying. They would think about, now I'm finally a complete whole person. My leg is gone. This is what I've wanted forever. His obsession was to get the leg cut off, and it cost him his life.
A suburban California family hurries through breakfast. This is 1970, and Florence Brown is expected to do it all. Juggling her duties as wife and mother of 5 with a full-time career.
Florence Brown was a school teacher, was very popular, one of those teachers that you remember for a long time after school. She was one of those teachers that inspired. She was just a lovely woman who loved to teach.
Florence has another busy day at the chalkboard and a PTA meeting tonight.
Okay, well, I'll see you all later. Be good.
This will be their last kiss. Florence never makes it to her PTA meeting, and she doesn't return home that night.
Florence Brown just disappeared. She and her car were both gone. It's just like she vanished off the face of the earth.
Her husband reports her missing to police. Did Florence simply run away, leaving her busy home life behind?
Her marriage was solid. She had a nice marriage, and everybody talked about how devoted she was to her husband to her, so I think that was quickly dismissed.
2 weeks go by, and still no leads.
It was just a complete mystery. Nobody could find anything in Florence's background that would indicate that she would just disappear on her own.
Then, someone stumbles on the truth.
Some hikers were in the mountains when they stumbled across the gravesite. And of course, they were aghast at what they found. The remains, partial remains of a body buried in a shallow grave.
It's the body of Florence Brown.
She'd been very badly mutilated. There were strips of skin removed from her back. Her right arm was missing, and she'd just been generally hacked to pieces.
Most horrifying of all, Florence Brown has a gaping hole where her heart used to be. A dark temptation has infiltrated Orange County.
It's someplace where bad things don't happen. They just thought they had a psycho killer on the loose. Something very evil was going on.
June 1970. In LA, the Manson family is about to go on trial. And just down the I-5, Orange County will not escape the hand of evil.
She'd been very badly mutilated.
Mother of 5, Florence Brown, has been found murdered, her body cut to pieces. It can spell only one thing.
Everyone was concerned about cult murders, about Satanism. People were scared. They thought it could be another Manson kind of case.
Another Manson prowling these suburban streets? A wave of fear washes over the OC.
Here comes this report of Satanism in a murder in Orange County, and I'll tell you, it freaked people out.
The fear rises as the leads run out.
There were no suspects for Florence. She didn't have any enemies. She was well respected in her community. She was loved by her husband and her kids. Something very bad, something very evil was going on. People were scared.
Satanic worship is a popular temptation in 1970. In this age, a devotion to the devil is almost as fashionable as long hair and free love.
Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub. The devil has many names.
Forensic psychologist Stephen Diamond says Satanism drove a fiery pitchfork into the dreams of flower power.
The 60s were the time of peace and love. It was the hippie era, and it's as if what had been repressed during this era came back with a vengeance. It came back in this form of a fascination with Satanism and with the devil and with the dark side.
Has a fascination with the devil sparked this horrific crime? The answer lies in another dark deed. Just 2 days before Florence's death, just a few miles away. Jerry Carlin is a young newlywed just starting out.
He's just a hardworking young man. I mean, he didn't have a lot of opportunities in his young life, so he's working the night shift. He'd recently gotten married and was trying to support himself and his wife.
His wife drops him off at his night job at a local gas station. This is their last kiss. A few hours later, Jerry is dead.
An ambulance driver stopped in to use the gas station restroom. There was no attendant visible. He went into the bathroom and he found Jerry on the floor, and it was a bloodbath.
The cash register is open and empty.
The police assumed that it had been a robbery that had gone really wrong.
At the time, they were looking for anybody. They looked at the other robberies to see if there was a connection with those in this robbery. Immediately, they didn't have any suspects in mind.
Until California cops arrest a 21-year-old drifter on unrelated charges. He's wearing a stained denim jacket.
He's in jail, and he tells the jailers about the jacket, how he happened to have it.
That denim jacket, that was the big break in the case.
The jacket belongs to murdered man Jerry Carlin. The stain is Jerry's blood. The drifter says someone else gave him the jacket.
It'd been brought to him by these guys that he knew. They were staying in a motel room in Costa Mesa.
He woke up that morning. He was given it.
His tip-off leads police to a gang of young drug addicts.
There were really a bunch of dysfunctional people, kind of gypsy-type group. They were taking at that time a sleeping pill called sodium seconol. If you take enough of them, you get really drunk. And at that time in Orange County, there were a lot of people, young kids, taking sodium seconol to get the high off of it. The whole town was full of hippies and drug users. It was way worse than it is today.
The gang's leader is Stephen Hurd.
He was a young man in his early 20s. He was an average-looking person.
But cops discover Stephen's not so average.
He believed that his father was Satan and that he was the son of Satan. He used to say, talk to the devil every day and every night. He was always talking to the devil.
Stephen and his band of followers call themselves the Sons of Satan.
I proclaim Satan Lucifer as my one and only God.
They honor the devil night after night in the back blocks of Santa Ana.
The type of personality that would be attracted to these kinds of satanic cults tend to be individuals who feel very alienated from society, who are kind of misfits.
Hail Satan!
Satanism is very attractive to teenage boys because of the power issue.
Hail Satan!
Stephen's satanic obsession is taking him to a much darker place. He wants a new way to please his father.
If you worship Satan, you have to obey Satan, and you have to do his bidding, and his bidding is evil. And what's more evil than murder?
He's only 20. Stephen Hurd could be just another off-the-rails Orange County kid with wild hair and a drug habit. But he has another dark temptation. He believes he is the son of Satan.
Steve Hurd had developed these people into this satanic cult that he was engaged in, worshiping his father, who he considered to be the devil.
In the summer of 1970, Orange County police have linked Hurd and his gang to the murder of Jerry Carlin. When Hurd is hauled in for questioning, the whole story spills out.
As soon as Stephen Hurd was arrested, he immediately gave up everyone he knew in connection with the case. He just started whining, and he gave everyone up.
The tale begins with his quest to drive to San Francisco.
Stephen Hurd had this notion in his mind he wanted to see the head devil. But to get there, they needed some resources. They needed money and they needed transportation.
One late night in June, they roll into a gas station in Santa Ana. Jerry Carlin is the lone employee.
Far out, man.
Stephen Hurd went in first.
Boys, how you doing?
This is a robbery.
He told Jerry Carlin this is a robbery.
At Hurd's side is follower Craig Moose Hulse.
Get out of here, man.
Open the till.
No.
Jerry has been robbed 3 times already this month, and he's had enough.
Open the till! Open the till! Don't struggle, man! Don't struggle!
Stephen and Craig took Jerry into the bathroom. Craig had had a small hatchet tucked in his waistband. He pulled it out, and he just went off. He battered him to death in that bathroom.
Jerry Carlin's life is sacrificed for a few lousy dollars.
This rubber netted $73 and a can of oil additive and a jacket.
Hurd is very happy with the work of his satanic disciple.
According to Hurd's testimony, at the scene, Moose licks blood off the hatchet. And Hurd says, man, that was cool. That was great. And he complimented Hulse on his bravado.
Stephen Hurd has also acquired a taste for blood. His dark temptation is rising. The cult decides to continue their quest, but they don't get far.
They were driving around in Herman's car, and it was a piece of junk. It started to sputter, and they pulled off the Sand Canyon off-ramp, and it just stopped. And so they were stuck on the off-ramp of the freeway. You know, these group of sketchy-looking characters when a CHP cruiser rolls up and sees these guys, and he doesn't like what he sees.
In the trunk is Jerry Carlin's murder weapon. The blood has been cleaned off, so the officer thinks nothing of it. And he lets the group go. They almost get away with murder. But their mission to meet the head devil has hit a snag. The car's broken down. They need a new ride to San Francisco, so they stop the next car that happens by.
And Florence Nancy Brown drives up in her Pontiac station wagon, and they just put a knife to her throat and jump in the car and push her over and drive off. It was as quick an abduction as you'll ever see it.
The mother of 5 on her way to a PTA meeting is no match for 3 men with a bloodlust.
These 3 guys surrounded her, and she asked them plaintively, am I gonna die? Stephen Hurd says, damn right you are, bitch. She was stabbed multiple times in the chest with a large knife.
Florence is stabbed 20 times, and her body is dumped. But Stephen Hurd returns later. He has unfinished business.
He returned to the body, severed the arm, cut out some ribs, and cut out the heart.
For Stephen Hurd, the mutilation of Florence Brown's body was a tribute from him to Satan. He said that he made a circle and that he put her heart in it and burned it.
When we talk about saving a part of the body for Satan, it's a kind of offering.
He does more than just burn it.
He did confess to the police that he had cut out her heart and ate it because that would preserve it in some weird fashion for his father.
It's the idea of we're going to give the devil his due. We're going to give Satan his share, and then we will partake of the rest.
Stephen even keeps a memento of his satanic ritual.
Steve cut off her fingers and put them in his pocket. And ultimately, he was arrested with her fingers in his pocket.
Defense attorney William Gamble believes his client is not fit to stand trial.
I was well aware what mental illness was, and Steve was crazy.
Stephen Hurd was examined and found to be insane. He couldn't aid in his own defense was the issue because he was judged to be insane.
The state of California agrees. Hurd is committed to a psychiatric hospital. But 5 years later, in 1975, he is deemed fit for trial.
Stephen Hurd was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
Craig Moose Hulse is also found guilty of murder and sentenced to life.
I've been a lawyer now for 45 years. I'm in criminal court every day. And this is one of the most egregious crimes that I've ever been involved in. And it's just a very perverse type thing.
Years after the crimes, journalist Larry Wellborn met the widow of Jerry Carlin.
She told me that on the night he died, he kissed her and said, "I remember, I'll always love you." And she never saw him again, and she had not yet told him that she was pregnant. So he never knew that he was a father, and this young woman was left to try to raise his son the best that she could, and that's a tragedy.
In Orange County, Satanism has crept back into its box. But Stephen Hurd never emerges from his dark temptation. In 2005, he dies of a brain hemorrhage in prison, still believing he would join his father in hell.
He told me one day, he said, "Mr. Gamble, I'll tell you what." He said, "You know, when people die, somebody's got to pass judgment on them. It's going to be my father, the devil, and it's going to be me."